Welcome back to my channel. In this video we're going to talk about the ruby cloak from Once Upon a Time. This is part 2, the actual construction and completion of the cloak. So I have finally officially completed this cloak, and there's some things I'm happy about, some things I'm not happy about. I am particularly not happy about not finding more appropriate fabrics for the patchwork. I went to a local fabric shop and they happened to have the exact lattice print fabric that I needed for part of the patchwork. However, they only had it in lime green. They had 2 bolts of it in lime green, but no other colors. And I will talk a little bit more about my process with the patchwork in a bit, but the patchwork is honestly my biggest disappointment with this project. I don't think it came out terrible, but it's just not to the level that I wanted it to be, but that's mostly because I couldn't find the exact same fabrics, which is to be expected. It's not always easy to do, and considering that this is a now 10-year-old show, it's very likely that many of those fabrics have been discontinued. This project did take me a little bit longer to work on. I started to develop really bad migraines, which isn't particularly unusual for me. I have been a chronic migraine sufferer since I was in kindergarten. So I started struggling with this project because my vision was starting to go. I was having migraines, and so I did go to a doctor. I did end up needing to get glasses. I'm still waiting on them to arrive, but I was suffering with a lot of severe pain and some nausea and just trouble seeing while working on this. So it did get a little bit better towards the end after a week had passed after the exam. The exam really messed me up. It made everything worse. Again, also I had to wait for some of the fabrics to be shipped in, so this took a lot longer than I wanted it to, but it's done. I decided to start with the lining of the cloak. I figured this would be really easy just to stitch up, get it done, get it put together, and set it aside and be ready for doing everything else. And I had began pinning my pattern to the main fabric. I started pinning, and quite a couple times I got way too nervous to cut the fabric. I had to keep walking away and coming back and convincing myself it was okay to cut the expensive fabric. After getting nervous a couple times, I gave up and decided to hem the lining instead. I made sure to trim off any excess and then turned over the hem and just tried to create a clean hem. Words are really failing me today. I did end up finding another photograph of this cloak, and it actually shows, I'll put the photograph somewhere, but it does show that the lining at the bottom of the cloak is not attached. So that sort of started to alter the way that I was going to approach doing the lining, and I went in kind of going back and forth with whether or not I was going to honor what the TV show did and leave the bottom of the lining open, or if I was going to fully attach the lining to the cloak. I did both, kind of. Once I finally got the courage to actually cut the main damask chenille, I got started, and luckily I have enough fabric left over that I can make something else with. I'm very excited. I didn't measure how much fabric I have left. I'm just kind of setting it aside right now because I don't have anything particular in mind for it, and I just kind of want it to be one of those things where once I come up with something, I just instinctually go, oh, I have that, that will be perfect for it. The next step was to construct the main body of the cloak. I did take the time to thread my serger, and I really did give it a good try. I tested it several times, did several scrap testing, and got it to work. I was very proud of myself, very excited, and of course as soon as I started working on the actual pattern pieces of the main fabric, my serger decided that it no longer wanted to stay threaded. One of the lower eyes kept coming undone, and I tried for 2 hours to fix this thing and get it to work. I watched so many videos and tutorials. I went through the user manual. I did everything I possibly could. Nothing was working. I just kind of eventually gave up on trying to use the serger at this point. Instead, I decided to try and opt for using a zigzag stitch with a basting stitch along the edges all along the main fabric in an attempt to sort of do a pseudo mock overlock to attempt to keep the fabric from fraying. That is mildly successful. It has so far helped quite a bit. Overall, that ended up working just fine. It did add a lot of extra time to the construction of this garment, having to completely go over the entire perimeter of each and every single piece twice, and then finally getting to the construction. Honestly, if there's a time in the future where I feel that I want to just remove the patchwork entirely and add a different bottom to this cloak, I might actually be happier. That's a possibility of something I might do. But as of right now, I did not completely do my sort of mock pseudo overlock style zigzag thingy to any of the patchwork pieces. That would have just taken me entirely way too long. It would have probably added another 4 or 5 days of work just to get all of these pieces done. So that just wasn't happening. And of course, as soon as I started assembling the main body of the cloak, I ran into bobbin troubles with my actual main machine. It really seemed like with this project, every single time I kind of got things rolling, something happened and something got in the way and kept slowing me down. And on top of that, I was feeling really crappy, and I was starting to feel like maybe this is the universe saying don't do this right now, but I had already cut everything and had already committed to it, so I just kind of plowed through. Did end up fixing my bobbin troubles. What exactly those were, I'm not sure. I full-on disassembled my sewing machine, found no issues, nothing wrong, timing wasn't wrong or anything, and when I completely reassembled it, surprise, it worked just fine all over again, as if nothing happened. So go figure. The next part was to focus on my sigil. I created a sigil specifically for myself, and I had every intention of digitizing the sigil and putting it on my machine and doing machine embroidery with it. However, this time I decided to do hand stitching because I hate myself. I absolutely loathe hand stitching, and for somebody who really likes historical dress and costuming, it's not good for me. Doesn't mean I won't do it, it just means I don't like doing it. But I decided to hand stitch my sigil into the pocket of the inside of this cloak. So of course I had to create my pocket first. And what I did to create my pocket, I didn't really do anything that fancy or specific. I kind of just did a basic pocket. Essentially, I just wanted it to be large enough to hold my cell phone, and drew a basic pocket shape around my phone, giving it a little bit of extra wiggle room, and of course adding some space for the seam allowance as well. And I will just quickly note here that I have not yet activated that sigil. I did not want to activate the sigil just yet because I do know that I'm not going to be wearing this cloak until probably about 6 months from now. I feel like activating the sigil now would be a waste of energy and time. So I'm not going to activate the sigil just yet. It's just kind of lying in wait. Once I had finished doing my hand stitching of the sigil, I actually layered a extra bit of the lining over top of it to help protect the sigil and keep it in place. The next part was to construct the hood. The vast majority of the hood was actually constructed by hand. Again, I hate myself for it, but it is done. I'm genuinely not the best at hand stitching. I hope I did well. I did turn the lining up and over to try and hide any raw edges and cover the bulk around the net. The next part to work on was the patchwork. I did end up doing a lot of ripping of things out, moving things around with this patchwork. Honestly, it was a nightmare. And when I finally got all the patchwork done, I quickly realized that one of the cottons that I had bought in lieu of the lattice work, I really didn't like, and it created a very stiff bottom to parts of the cloak, and I just did not like the way it hung at all. Look, I know that mixing chenille and cotton isn't exactly the smartest thing. I was really trying. I'm really hoping that the cotton would just kind of bend to my will, and it was more about the aesthetic than about logic. But I did end up just ripping it out. I mean, full on just grabbing it and pulling it out because it was atrocious. I did not like it. It didn't look right. It hung weird. Eventually, it came time for the decorative embroidery. I had two threads that I initially had wanted to use. I had this mixture of red and gold sort of twisted thread that I had really wanted to use because, as I had stated in the first portion of this video, it's kind of hard to tell exactly what color the embroidered sort of overhand stitching on the patchwork is supposed to be. However, that just was not working. The next thread that I tried was a sort of burnt orangey red thread that I figured would have that brownish look without being, again, too in your face. I did a couple stitches with that and I just did not like the way it looked. It did not show up well enough, so I decided that wasn't going to work. Instead, I ended up grabbing some embroidery thread or embroidery floss, however you want to address it, and just ended up using that to create the overhand stitching along the patchwork. Again, of course, all of that was done completely by hand. And of course, just my luck, as soon as I was nearly done, I ran out of thread. And of course, because Joann's is terrible, I ended up having to go to 3 different locations just to find one more spool of that same thread in the same colorway. But I did eventually finally get all of that complete as well. And I ended up at this point deciding that even though I had already stitched up the inner lining to the bottom hem of the cloak, and again, I had done all of it by hand, I ended up ripping that out because I just didn't like the way that it laid. When I did that, I just wanted it to be a bit more free-flowing and a bit more, I guess, rustic, and I wanted to try and keep it a bit closer to what we actually see in the TV show. The next thing came the armholes. And if you thought I had a lot of anxiety about cutting this fabric with just cutting the pattern pieces, you have no idea how much anxiety I had trying to cut the armholes, because now I'm doing this on what is essentially the completed cloak. I had gone back and forth on whether or not I even wanted to add the armholes to it. However, after trying the cloak on a couple of times, moving around in it, I quickly realized that with the amount of weight that it has, it definitely does greatly benefit from having armholes. So I simply just used some bias tape to bind the armholes and try and make them look as neat as possible. I did mess up and sew one of the armholes completely backwards, but ultimately I got it. It's done. The last bit of problem that I ran into was the necktie. So while I did end up deciding that I was going to add the ribbon same as it is in the TV show, I again made the mistake of going to Joann's, and I specifically went to the section where they have trims and ribbons for clothing construction and spent $4 on the world's crappiest, like damn near paper ribbon. And I'm so mad because of course it was in one of those spools where it's bound and you can't feel it, see it, nothing. I was like, oh, this is just like a standard red ribbon, no big deal. Yeah, no, this thing is absolute crap. So it's not happening. So for the time being, I decided to just completely forego having any sort of closure. I will add a ribbon closure to this eventually. It's just not going to be right now. I'm not going back out and dealing with Joann's again. So it's just done. And so of course that means it is time for the reveal. And we will do a quick walkthrough of the cloak itself. You can better see the armholes here, and of course here. Of course when you open up, there is the pocket right here. So you can put whatever you want in there. Honestly, I do have to say though, my favorite part is the back. But of course, I know that what you're really interested in is seeing it in action, so let's cut to that.